So the question of post-approval. What are the main methodological issues? And I will give you immediately the answer, not what you think. Why? First, if there is post-approval, there is approval. And this is the main methodological thing. You know that there is approval with many methodological issues and post-approval. And if we have to determine the specificity of post-approval, we have to enter in the details of approval. What is the objective of approval? You will say immediately positive benefit-risk balance. Even if it is not positive, you know, the ratio should be superior to 1. Okay. Anyway, is approval really the objective of approval showing that benefits are superior to risk? The answer is no, of course not. Of course not. At least on a methodological point of view. You know how EMA or FDA decide that there is an approval. With statistics, no, they vote. This is not serious on a methodological point of view. And they have no choice because we know that it is not possible to measure benefits and risk on the same scale, except it perhaps for QALYs or things like that, but approval is not given on QALYs anyway. So the real question is if approval is not determined to decide that benefits are superior to risk, what is for what is destined approval? Approval is based on phase 3 studies. Okay. Phase 3 studies study benefits and risk. Okay. Concerning benefits, if you look at from far, the quality of evidence is great. When you look at the level of evidence that is proposed in scientific journals in medicine, the scientific evidence, the quality of evidence of benefits in phase 3 trial is really great. And you have ACH guidelines and statistics are good, methods are good, etc. The clinical relevance is very poor, in fact. It is poor, and sometimes we do not want to accept this, but this is reality because of the quality of outcome, response-free survival. What does it mean? And we measure quality of life, but this is not well measured at all. We give questionnaire to people and we take the questionnaire and missing data, etc. And of course the fact that this is not real life studies, and so the clinical relevance of results. When you test a medication in bipolar disorder in India, what is the relevance in France? This is crazy. Everybody knows that, of course. Concerning the risk, what is the quality of evidence? Poor. Poor, of course, poor, for many reasons. Because you know that the investment in looking for outcome in a randomized controlled trial is not comparable to the investment to measure safety. The physician has to ask for results, for safety, problem, but you know that physicians don't like to see side effects in their patient because they gave the pill and they are somewhere responsible for side effects somewhere. And so they don't want to see that patient could have side effects. So there is a bias in the determination of side effects. And sample size is determined for power, but for power of the benefits, not for the risk. And it is well known that most often you have no statistical power to find the risk in a phase 3 trial. And there is even a question, statistical inference, is it the same for benefits and for risk in phase 3 trial? And the answer is no, obviously. Obviously, for the reason of power, I told you, power is very important for the outcome, but you never have any power estimation for the side effects. And in addition, a type 1 error is very important for the outcome, but the type 1 error is not so important for the side effect. You do not need to be sure that there is a side effect to say that there is a side effect, of course. And so in a way, statistical inference is not the same. And I have seen recently some reports of randomized control trial where there were no statistical testing for side effects, just the figures, saying implicitly that we do not need to do statistical tests because they are not relevant in this situation. Okay. So it raises the question of statistical inference. If it is not the same statistical inference in benefits and in risk, what about statistical inference? And you will say immediately, statistical inference is about Neyman and Pearson. Of course, we learned that in school and everybody knows that. Well, in fact, remember that at the very beginning it was Fisher who invited the statistical tests, 1922, 1925. And Neyman and Pearson, and perhaps you don't remember that this is not the good Pearson. It was the son of the good Pearson. And when Neyman and Pearson, Karl Pearson, the great statistician, this is not the Pearson of Neyman and Pearson. It is Egon Pearson, the son of Karl Pearson. And most likely he was not really involved in Neyman and Pearson testing. It was most Neyman than Pearson that created the test. This is what historians say. Anyway, perhaps you know that there has been a great tension between Fisher and Neyman and Pearson. A great tension. And some people consider that, in fact, they proposed different way to do statistical inference. There is a discussion about that. Not so active at the moment, but it has been very active up to the 2000. Why? Why Neyman and Pearson came after Fisher? Because Fisher invited the p-value, and Neyman and Pearson created the type 1 and type 2 error with their lemma. And so with Fisher, there was no statistical power. And you understand that for randomized control trials, there is a problem. If there is no statistical power, it will be difficult to do a randomized control trial. So with Fisher, there was no statistical power, and Neyman and Pearson considered it was a very important issue. Look at, in a paper of Lehman in Annals of Statistics in 1993, there is a summary of this discussion. Lehman was a very great statistician, and he mentioned a sentence of Lehman in 1993. Lehman. And Lehman mentioned a paper of Neyman in 1961, and Neyman grasped the very difference between Fisher inference and his inference. And so Neyman considers that Fisher was in favor of some kind of inductive reasoning, while Neyman and Pearson wanted to have some kind of inductive behavior. This means that with the p-value, you say, wait, p-value is 10, 4, 1, right, 1.001, oh, extreme. And it makes the level of evidence, the level of inference greater and greater. This is some kind of inductive reasoning. While for Neyman and Pearson, you have to decide between H0 and H1, and so there is a behavior in the decision. And so this is considered as a very strong epistemological difference. Lehman discussed that in the paper of Annals of Statistics in very details. Lehman do not agree really in most of this difference, but I think on a philosophical point of view, it does exist. And I just propose to you two small papers of Fisher. The first one, perhaps you didn't see this paper. It is the paper where Fisher proposed that the threshold for the p-value should be 5%. So this is historical, because quite millions of people every day are dealing with 5%. And this is the paper which comes from this 5%. So he say, well, if it is 0.1, 0.9, well, we cannot say everything. If it is below 0.02, there is something, inductive reasoning. And so, between 0.02 and 0.01, 0.09, I propose 0.05. This is just like that. So, this is soft. And in the tension with Neyman and Pearson, he wrote that after to say that the threshold of 5% was crazy. In fact, it was crazy. So he said, of course, if we reject hypotheses with a significance level of 1%, of course, we will certainly be mistaken in not more than 1% of such decision. However, the calculation is absurdly academic. For in fact, no scientific worker has a fixed level of significance at which, from year to year, and in all circumstances, he rejects hypotheses. He rather gives his mind to each particular case in the light of his evidence and his ideas. This is very inductive. There is no strict rule where you decide or you reject. Okay, so I come back to statistical inference and to approval and to what happens in a randomized control trial. In approval, there is a behavior because you give the approval, yes or no. This is not a question of reasoning, this is a question of behavior. And you need the statistical power with approval. So, because you need statistical power and you need to do a behavior, naturally, you will use Neyman and Pearson theory. Okay. Is there another reason, or are there other reasons? The answer is yes, and the other reasons are by far more important than this one. The other reasons come from the fact that what is the big science behind medicines? What is the big theory which underlines research in medicine? Biology, of course. What is the reasoning of biology? It is like physics, it is deterministic. Biologists want to find universal rules, like in genetics with DNA, etc. They are scientists, they like beautiful theory, and a beautiful theory can only be deterministic. And this is exactly what say Claude Bernard, who was perhaps the father of modern biology and modern medical research. In the patient who succumbed, the cause of death was evidently something which was not found in the patient who recovered. This is something we must determine, and then we can act on the phenomena or recognize or foresee them accurately. Then only scientific determinism will be achieved. But not by statistics shall we succeed in this. Never have statistics taught anything. And never can they teach anything about the nature of phenomena. I shall apply what I have just said to all the statistics compiled for the object of learning the efficacy of certain remedies in curing disease. While for approval, which determined the efficacy of remedies, what is used for approval, only statistics, not only. There are preclinical work with mechanism of action, but mainly it is statistics. So there is a big tension between biological thinking and statistics. And this is explained in a very good book, The Program of Experiment, Science and Therapeutic Reform in the United States. The French title is Anthropologie et histoire des essais thérapeutiques au XXe siècle. This is exactly that, and this is very interesting for us. What does say the book? It said that during the first half of the 20th century, people wanted to have the biological way of thinking to evaluate treatment, like Claude Bernard. And in fact, after the Second World War, they consider that it does not work. Because with only biology, you cannot say that a medication is efficient or not. This is not possible because it is too complex. Human beings are too complex. And so you need statistics because with statistics you can deal with complexity. But you will do inference only for an average people. This is the price to pay. And so after the mid of the 20th century, there is a rise of what is called today evidence-based medicine, which is based on, not on biology. Evidence-based medicine is not based on biology, it is based on statistics. And so there is a tension between the culture of medical research, which is biological, and evidence-based medicine. There is a big tension. And because there is tension, there are resistance, conscious or unconscious, against the loss of determinism. And in fact, what we are going to see is that randomized control trial and Niemann in person have been a miraculous solution to deal with this resistance. How? In practice, when do you have an approval for a drug? This is not true, but this is rough, but anyway, when you have 2 positive randomized control trials and when you have not that much side effects, you will have approval, basically. Why? Because if you do a randomized control trial, you are dealing with real patients, not with germs or biology. And this is the right arm of evidence-based medicine. You have to deal with patients and not with biology. Okay, this is fine. Second point. Since you will use Niemann and Pearson theory, you will be able to do an inductive behavior, and this is good for approval. Okay, next. When you have Niemann and Pearson and a randomized control trial, what do you have at the end? At the end, you have H0 or H1 with a good methodology, with a good level of evidence. And so it appears as something which is deterministic. It appears, and look at all of us, when we do a randomized control trial, at the end, P is equal to 0.06. It does not work. P is equal to 0.03. Wow, it works. And in the mind of everybody, if you have a trial with a P inferior to 0.05, the drug works. If it is not the case, the drug does not work. But this is not what says statistics. Statistics that say that you will take a risk or not. Not that the drug works or not. And every people consider that either the drug works or it does not work. And so at the moment, statistical inference is not some kind of inductive reasoning or inductive behavior. We use statistical inference as a deductive reasoning or behavior. If P is inferior to 0.05, then the drug is active. If not, then the drug is not active. This is some kind of deduction, which is crazy. But it is what we do. Not we, statisticians, but the health authorities. And people reading to papers. This is day-to-day life. When you have a P superior to 0.05, there is nothing. When it is the contrary, there is something. And this is because of that people are misleading with statistics. And there are papers in Nature, in PNAS about that. This is because we do not consider statistical inference as inductive, but as deductive. And this is the origin of a major issue. The second thing that makes randomized control trial and Niemann and Pearson so important is that when you do randomized control trial and you add placebo, then you can show that not that the medication is interesting for patient, because the placebo can be interesting for patient, but you can show that you do not deal with quackery. Vous n'êtes pas un charlatan. And this is this is the core of approval. The core of approval is to secure society that the drug that has been studied is not Quakery. Because medicine has suffered from Quakery for centuries. Okay. And so, you know, when you add all those sort of things, this is with real patient, you have a behavior, you can decide yes or no. It appears as deterministic, and so you find your deterministic epistemology that is within biology. While you are doing statistics, it is as if you have a deterministic reasoning. This is crazy, but this is what people believe. And you have a victory against quackery. When you consider all of this is quite a miracle for people. This is the miracle. And so, because of that, Neyman and Pearson and randomized controlled trial and placebo has become a totem. And of course, you understand that when we will come to post-approval studies, we will have a problem because it is difficult to struggle against a totem. So I come to post-approval. What are the questions in post-approval? The questions are price and reimbursement and safety, mainly. But these questions are not in yes-no. Reimbursement, some kind of yes-no. Even if in France you have reimbursement 25%, 16%, 45%, 100%. So this is not so yes-no, and price is not a yes-no situation. And safety is not a yes-no situation. Second point, in post-approval, you have to estimate reliably the effect size. What does the medication on a clinically relevant outcome, which is something new. You should have real-life data, which is not necessarily the case with phase 3 trial. And sometimes you have to do cost-effectiveness analysis. Okay. The problem is that you cannot use anymore the totem with such requirement. You cannot use, because you have no more yes-no situation, Neyman-Pearson is not that interesting. Because you have to do with real life, clinically relevance, cost effectiveness, randomized controlled trial are not so interesting as a methodology. And because you have to deal with clinically relevance and real life, placebo are completely irrelevant. So, you have lost your totem in post-approval situation. And so people are completely lost. And you have no more deductive reasoning and behavior. You know, this is the case. Consider as the extreme cost efficiency, cost per quality studies. There is not at all deductive reasoning, you know. When you have to estimate the number of qualities related to a medication, wow, this is very soft inference, you know. Even the confidence interval of the number of qualities per year is very difficult to estimate on a statistical point of view. This is extremely soft statistics, extremely soft reasoning and induction. And so people are lost even if most of you know perfectly that there are methods to deal with this situation. To answer this question, we have statistical methods, we have design, and we have statistical tools. You can do network meta-analysis, you can do epidemiology, you can use propensity score matching, you can use marginal structural model, and even with inference, you have a bias, of course. False discovery rate, you can just use confidence interval, you know. So no more Neyman-Pearson, no more Fisher. You can do other ways, which are very relevant. But if you do that, nobody will accept the results. Because this does not correspond to their way of thinking, you know. They want some kind of deductive reasoning. They want to know if yes or not the drug is interesting, even if you cannot answer to this question by yes or no. And even statistics are not designed to give a yes or no answer on a deterministic point of view. This is crazy, but this is what everybody considers. And so they will say no. And so you will become frustrated. And this is reality. Firms do post-approval study, and most of institutions say, well, what is this mess? There are confounding factors. I adjust on propensity score. Non-measurable confounding factor. You cannot say anything against that. Instrumental variable. What is it? What is this? And even with instrumental variable, you are not sure to have a yes/no answer. And so it does not work. And so this is my last slide. The main methodological issues for post-approval studies are educational and not technical. So we can continue to do research in statistics and in methods about post-approval study. You can do some very sophisticated statistics and mathematics. If people still consider that statistical reasoning is deterministic, is a deduction, then it will never work. And so before doing this very highbrow research, we have to change the mind of people. We have to teach. We have to teach the institution, and we have to teach also the firms, because the firms do not know even all the points I mentioned before. And so we have the responsibility to say to people that at the moment there is a real mess with statistical inference. And this is because of that we are in front of a wall. And to go over this wall, we have to put everything on the table, and all these things are related to statistical inference. And I thank you for your attention.